Last week we were talking after church over refreshments about prayer and healing and all of that, and Bev suggested that I talk a little bit about Myrtle Fillmore's healing journey. So that's what I'm doing today, is Be Transformed, Myrtle Fillmore's healing journey. The Be Transformed comes from a line in Paul, which I'm sure you're aware of. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind is the full expression of that. But she displayed a transformation, and I think we can all probably learn something from her experience. So the Unity Movement was founded on prayer, and Myrtle Fillmore, one of our co-founders, was a frail child who suffered from tuberculosis, was not expected to live a long life. She grew up hearing that her disease was inherited, and there was nothing she could do about it. So she battled most of her early life with this, and Myrtle Fillmore, in case you don't know, is the wife of Charles Fillmore. Both of them, we call them the co-founders of the Unity Movement. Both had healing issues. Charles Fillmore, when he was younger, was ice skating, and he fell and hurt his hip and had trouble with that all of his life. One leg was shorter than the other, and he had a built-up shoe to compensate for that. So they both dealt with healing. And that has always been interesting to me. If it was not for problems, if it wasn't for disease and hurting, breaking things, scope bite, that we may not be pushed to learn things. So the whole Unity Movement came out of this, and the Unity Movement has touched millions of lives. And you could truthfully say that those millions of lives that were touched came out of disease, came out of problems, came out of trying to figure out how to get through them by spiritual means. If you don't have the problem, you're not going to try to get out of it, probably. So that says something about the challenges that we have in life. And I'm not suggesting that we all go out and get a few, because we don't have any at the moment. But it's, when you are backed in a corner, you tend to do some pretty serious thinking and some pretty serious inventory. Looking at, what are the beliefs, what are the ideas and all. So she, having this problem, was very aware of the problem and spent her life trying to correct it. And she did it through normal medical means with no luck. But something happened here. She was at a talk that was being given by Dr. E.B. Weeks. As an adult, she attended a lecture by Dr. E.B. Weeks, who was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins, a noteworthy name in the early New Thought movement. Dr. Weeks made a statement that changed Myrtle's life. He said, "You are a child of God, and you cannot inherit sickness." So that was her worldview. I inherited sickness, and so I can't do much about it. And he said just the opposite. Well, I learned something about E.B. Weeks. I didn't know anything about him. This is the only picture that we have of him. The insert there is Emma Curtis Hopkins, and he was on her board of directors. She had an institute in Chicago, metaphysical thing. She is known as the teacher of teachers. She trained a lot of people, including the Fillmores. But I found out that from Thomas Witherspoon, not directly from him, but from the website of Mark Hicks, who does Truth Unity. Type in Truth Unity sometime and you'll get Mark's website. He puts up all the history of Unity, a very, very good resource. And he's a good friend of mine also. Known Mark for many years. But what Thomas Witherspoon, who wrote The Mother of Unity, the book The Mother of Unity, which is a pretty definitive book on Myrtle Fillmore. He said that he was on the board of directors and he was a real pain to Emma Curtis Hopkins. And I would say the way he described it, pain well below the neck. You guys are slow. But she actually sent him to Kansas City to get him out of Chicago. I don't know if they were having a meeting or not, but she considered him a problem person, apparently. Wanted to get rid of him. So that's another thing, you know, he's a problem. She sends out of town. He gives a talk that changes a woman's life and taps into millions of other people who are looking for help. So how's that work? You know, it's just kind of an interesting way to see things. I didn't know this till yesterday about E.B. Weeks. I just only heard his name, never saw his picture, I didn't know he was on her. I thought he was one of her students. I didn't know he was on her board of directors and that he was a pain below the neck. But anyway, that's the way things work out sometimes. You know, when our life is running real smooth and everything's just fine, we don't tend to ask the same questions that we do when it's not running so smooth. And when it's not running so smooth, all we want to do is make it run smooth again. We want to get back to where things are on an even keel. And we probably learn in the process. That's not always true, but sometimes we just want to get rid of the problem. But when we are on this spiritual path, I think we have a tendency to ask more, what might I be doing? You know, what might be going on in my mind that I might be able to change? I think we become more aware of that. Instead of, you know, praying up to the sky to get God to change, to get God to do something for us, we look more on the inside to see what we might be doing, how we might be thinking. And I think what Myrtle Fillmore was not necessarily thinking negatively, but that was really her worldview, that you have inherited sickness. So that is negative thinking, but it's not her, you know, just being a negative person. That's what she thought was true. And so she was just following that. So somebody comes along, even a guy that's a pain to somebody else, makes a statement that totally opens her eyes, you know, totally opens her up. I had a person come into my office years ago that was experiencing cancer, and we had a prayer, and it was a couple of weeks later the cancer was in total remission, and they called and said they thanked me for that prayer. Well, I didn't feel like I did anything other than just make some positive statements. I don't take credit for the healing of the person, but they were healed. They had a healing. Something in them changed. And I've had a couple of experiences like that. And I was very interested in healing early in my career, but I decided I'm not a healer. I'm not of that mindset. I'm more in the understanding how these principles work. That's what I really enjoy most. But there are people that are gifted with that, and Myrtle Fillmore became one of those people. And she probably never would have become one of those people if she wasn't a person in need in the first place. So that's kind of the silver lining, you know, in the cloud. And it was a big one in her case. But that statement captured her attention. She spent the next several years in designated prayer time speaking affirmative healing statements to her body. She kept an empty chair in front of her and imagined Jesus sitting in it, offering healing guidance. So what she did was she began to set her mind up in a different way. She went into to healing sessions. She would have prayer sessions, where she would devote herself to this healing activity, and she began to speak to her body, just seeing the light of God shines through me, and she had all kinds of statements. I would recommend anything written by her, Myrtle Fillmore's healing letters, or just go online and you can pick up almost all of it is available now online. But she will connect with you. Charles Fillmore was pretty intellectual. You got to kind of follow him. You got to kind of think about what he's saying when he's writing. Myrtle speaks a little bit more to, I think, the average person. And she went through this healing process. Charles Fillmore said, as they started this whole unity movement, that he would have thrown in the towel many times. But she was the one that kept carrying the ball. She was the one that kept it all moving forward. And I think that's very important to recognize. He's usually given the credit because he wrote so much. You know, he wrote so many books. And actually, he wrote. Somebody said he was a paragraph writer. It was Cora Fillmore, his secretary and second wife, actually, that did most of the compiling of the books. After Myrtle passed, he married his secretary. So she did most of the compiling, but he is sometimes hard to follow. And I have talked to people through the years, what do you think of Charles Fillmore's writings? And a lot of people say that he's hard to follow. And I don't agree with a lot of the things he wrote. I agree with almost all of what I've read from Myrtle. So it's that's just a personal thing. But just to kind of keep a perspective of how we got where we are in this unity movement, the person that's considered the grandfather of New Thought in America is Phineas Parkhurst Quimby. And he lived 1802 to 1866, died in 1866. One of his students was Mary Baker Eddy, founder of Christian Science. And there was a huge controversy around those two people. She totally denounced Quimby after, and that's a long story I don't want to get into. So if you talk to a Christian Scientist today, they may discount what I'm saying here. But she was one of his students. We have the evidence of that. And one of her editors, her main editor, was Emma Curtis Hopkins, who then broke off from Mary Baker Eddy and ran her own metaphysical college in Chicago. And the Fillmores were some of her students. They were very close. Emily Cady was another one of her students. She wrote Lessons in Truth. That's the one that opened my eyes to the whole unity thing. But that gives you kind of a perspective. But Phineas Quimby he started out as a mesmerist. And that the science of mind, you hear that term, science of mind, he's kind of the founder of how the mind relates to the body and how disease plays in and all of that. One of the very best books of his to pick up is Quimby Manuscripts. And I think that's still available on Amazon or through Abe Books, used books. You can get it for about $5 or $6. It gives you that history and the letters and all that he wrote. He was totally uneducated. But somebody said he was intelligent because when he misspelled words, he did it consistently. He spelled head, H-E-D, for example. But he learned the connection between mind and body. He would sit down with a person and just hold their hands. He would say, "Don't tell me what's wrong." And he would pick up their feelings and their beliefs about why they were sick. And he would say, "You're not sick for that reason. You're sick because you believe what your doctor said or you believe what your minister said." He said the two greatest causes of disease in the world are priesthood and doctors. And back then, maybe that's true. I don't know. But that's what he said. But a lot of people were brought to him for healing, he said, before the next step would have been the morgue, and the funeral home. So Mary Baker Eddy was healed by him at one point, or healed through his process. And then she had another bout with something where his disciples, he was dead by then, his disciples could not do the healing, and so she denounced that whole teaching and did it herself, started Christian Science. And then Emma Curtis Hopkins was her editor and was very close to her for several years, but then she went her separate ways. But Emma Curtis Hopkins was also a big influence on me. I was introduced to her way back in, I think, the late 70s. And so my favorite book of hers is High Mysticism. One I don't know that I would recommend necessarily because it's written to directly to the soul. You got to kind of shut your mind off and listen to it from the heart, read it from the heart. And it's a very powerful book. And it was also very influential with the Fillmores. So that's kind of where all that stands. Myrtle's healing was not instant. That is another thing that's important for us to keep in mind. If you're like me, I would like it to happen yesterday. You know, whatever need I have, we want to pray and have it be done. It took her about 2 years. You know, she lived a life of battling this, and it took her about 2 years, but she committed to it, that's the important part. Her healing was not instant. She devoted herself to changing her mind. Imagining healing energy directed by her own words was a powerful change of thinking. Envisioning Jesus as the great healing presence became a strong aid in her healing process. That's another important thing to remember. She saw Jesus in that way. You may not. I may not. But for her, that was a very powerful image to hold, and to be able to sit a chair in front of you and to imagine the healing presence of Jesus there. That's the whole point comes to, this was a change of her mind. She wasn't changing God. She was changing her own mind. So she grew up with this idea that you inherited this problem, and she decided to do something about it. I don't have to do that. I didn't inherit it. I'm a child of God. And that goes along very well with this idea that the soul is complete already. You know, that's the part that inherits from God. That's the image and likeness of God that we are. And the soul does not experience any lack of any kind. And that's where the near-death research helps us understand that these people step out of their body. They can have, very traumatic physical conditions. They step out of their body and they're completely whole. They're completely free of all pain, free of all limitation, and all of that. And that's what got me to thinking about the complete soul. They're saying that in the body I feel incomplete. I'm hurting. I feel like I'm limited. But you step out of the body, that same awareness, that same person, and everybody says, that's the same person, out of the body. I recognize myself, that identity that I am, but I'm free of that limitation. So whatever is in the body right now is not subject to whatever the body's going through. I doubt if my soul has ever experienced scope bite, and probably never will. Probably never shot a rifle, actually, but that is... when you're in the body, it's hard to kind of bypass that, and we don't want to bypass it necessarily, because we do have a body. But what we need to understand is what people like Myrtle Fillmore found out, is you can begin to see yourself in new ways. You can begin speaking healing words to your body. You can begin speaking balancing words to a situation that seems out of control. You can begin to change your thinking right where you are. And that is what prayer absolutely is. It's changing yourself. But that may require a change in the way you think of God. That I'm not praying to change God, I'm praying to open myself to greater healing energy, greater guiding energy, greater prospering energy, whatever the case may be. And to open ourselves to that understanding. It's a change of our own perspective, our own thought. So, it's a good feeling to know you don't have to do anything to put yourself in good favor with God. And that's a pretty big teaching. That's a pretty powerful teaching, that we've got to join the right church. We have to be baptized. We have to pray regularly. We have to read the Bible. We have to do certain things to stay in good standing with God. And the truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how far out of that we get, we're still one with God. And we can start speaking words of healing, of balance, of guidance, of whatever, and immediately bring ourselves back into alignment with that. So there's no need for forgiveness on God's part because there is no condemnation. That's the prodigal son going off, messing everything up, coming back. There's no forgiveness. There's not once that the Father talks about forgiving because he never condemned him. And I think that's the very best thing to keep in mind. It's also worth noting that prior to her spiritual approach, she tried every medication available, but to no avail. So that's another thing. She apparently put her faith in medicine, and it didn't help in her case. And her sons also complained about that she used to inflict all kinds of medications on them as well, because she was a total believer in medication. I, like many people in Unity, believe that there's a place for medication, and I'm sometimes very glad for that Alka-Seltzer, or that I was really happy when they put me out when they did my hernia repair. I was very happy, and I didn't want to have to do that myself. That I was very glad for the medical profession to be there. But she believed in that, and then she started realizing there's another dimension that I can bring into that. It doesn't necessarily mean you get rid of the medication, or, well, you may. That may be a good thing. I knew a woman that was suicidal who told me she was on 21 different drugs that she had been prescribed. And she, instead of killing herself, she decided to flush them all down the toilet. And she was healed. She came around. So who knows what 21 drugs do to a person, in your system churning around. Nobody knows what happens when that happens. So you may put that aside, but you may not. A lot of people would go to Unity retreats, and they would think, I don't need my medication. And they'd end up having a seizure of some kind because they stopped taking it. And the staff there would say, don't do that. Don't stop just because you're here. I quit smoking doing that, though. But that's kind of a different thing. I used to smoke cigarettes, and I went to a month-long series of classes. I stopped the day I got there and never looked back. Been well over 50 years ago. So, and I was up to 2 packs a day. So I felt that was a big change. I became a non-smoker instantly, and I tried to quit many times. So there's times when that does work, but if you're on some kind of a drug, medication that is, I've known people who were, not schizophrenic, but bipolar, and decided they didn't need the drugs, and well, they do. Sometimes they do. So this is not an either-or thing. Myrtle was going down that route. She was not even trying the spiritual thing. So when she did that, that's where her faith turned. So it's not a matter of one or the other. If one helps you, if you need that now, and it does help, and we got Pam here. She's been in that work all of her life. She's seen the good side of it too, and I'm sure you've seen both sides. But we don't want to say don't do that. We don't want to say that at all. And that's kind of what Christian Science has said in the past. I don't know what they say now, but I had an aunt would not go to doctor at all, no matter what. And sometimes they got pretty ill. So let's don't get into that. So prayer changes us. Her healing journey supports our basic understanding that prayer changes us, not God. Her change of mind, her healing affirmations, and her powerful visualizations brought her complete healing and the ability to live a very full life to age 86. At the end, she told her fellow workers at Unity she felt it was time for her to move on, that she could be more effective working from the other side. And she passed away shortly after she made the rounds. People, apparently the employees begged her not to go, not to do that. I don't know, Charles would probably not have approved of that because, in my book, The Complete Soul, I think it's the second chapter, the Fillmore influence. Quote him several times. He has no interest in death. He thinks there's no learning, there's no anything good that comes out of it. That you die, you go to sleep for however long, then you come back awake and you begin your evolutionary journey from that point on. And that flies in the face of the near-death research, that we have today. He didn't have that. They didn't have that back then. So I think that he may look at that in a little bit different way. But I've been told by people that knew him, I've known a couple of people that knew him. Ernest Wilson was one of them. He was a minister at Unity on the Plaza for many years. He spoke to our class several occasions. But said that Fillmore was very depressed when she passed, that he was sad in the sense that she shouldn't have died. She shouldn't have done that because he did not believe in death. He said he would be the first to be the one to stay in a body. And he got a lot of criticism for saying that. He got a lot of letters. He wrote it in Unity magazine, got a lot of negative responses for that, which I think is appropriate because that's a pretty big statement, to make, that we're supposed to live in the body forever. I don't personally want to do that. I don't know about you, but I suppose if I stayed 35 all the time, but that's what the near-deathers say. Every person they meet that's gone on, they're always 35 years old, so, we're going to get there anyway, so I'll do it that way. Myrtle has been an inspiration to millions of people. She was very down-to-earth, very practical, and totally committed to the spiritual truth taught through Unity. In terms of her writings, I've always considered her more accessible than Charles, who did most of the writing. Before Unity became a movement, she conducted healing services from her home, we're told, with marvelous results. And most of what we have there is through rumors, some through letters and so on, but I've always heard that there were a lot of, people might walk into the home on crutches and walk out without the crutches and things like that. So it's in the movement itself, Unity movement, when you go to ministerial school, you'll hear all of the rumors. There's one with May Rowland, who ran Silent Unity, I think, for many years. Did you know May, Pam? Yeah. Well, the famous story around her is Missouri is hit with tornadoes, every year, tornado season. And I know because I live there, and Kansas, all those areas. But the story is that a tornado was coming straight for Unity Village, and May Rowland steps out on the porch and cursed it or whatever, and it went in a different direction and just mowed down that town, instead of theirs. But, I would think that if you're going to pray a tornado, if prayer has an effect on a tornado, then let's see it dissolve. If that's, so you hear stories like that and you say, is that true or not? I don't know. Tornadoes change direction, all the time. But, it's just kind of what goes around things. Things build up. But I think that the healing thing, that was a big part of their lives, both of their lives, and I believe that a lot of the healings that occurred that were reported were true. And so it's, there's no doubt, just read any of her works. Also, concerning prayer, I think we have some books by Francis Folks on prayer. And I read that book years and years ago. It's one I would recommend also. There's several very good resources on these ideas. So Paul said, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And Myrtle Fillmore truly exemplified this principle. So I think that's the takeaway from her life. She was nothing special. She was a regular person, very devoted to her faith. She was, I think, a Presbyterian starting out. And, had always grew up in that. She was a teacher and, an academic type person. But, and Charles Fillmore he was self-educated. I think he had about a fourth grade education, if I understand. He taught himself. And if you read some of his writings, you think he's got a PhD. He's a very sophisticated writer. But the whole thing is they were devoted to healing. They branched out into things like prosperity and healing, relationships, and all of this stuff because the principles are all the same. You change your mind, you'll get different results. And if you believe in God, you believe that God is working through you as an influence, as a positive influence, fixing things you don't even know are broken. If you have that kind of faith, you open yourself to change in a positive way. Thank you for watching this week's program. If you enjoyed this video, please share it with others. We want to reach as many people as we can, and we appreciate your help. We have many subjects in our video lineup, so feel free to take a look. If there's a topic you don't see and would like me to address, just put it in the comment section. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Thanks again for your interest in Independent Unity, and have a wonderful week.